This model, being from 1953, has a couple of key features that I am super excited. Hey guys, it's Cam with Craft and Tailored. In this episode of What Is On My Wrist, we are talking about a 1953 Rolex Datejust reference 6104. This specific Datejust is in two-tone. It's very, very early. It bears the nickname Ovettone, and I think it's the first two-tone Datejust that we've ever featured on the channel. So I've been kind of holding out to find a Datejust that was special and kind of worthy of some time on the wrist, and this one definitely is. So let's dive into the specifics. So the Rolex Datejust is really one of the most iconic watches of all time. I don't know if you guys would agree with me. Let me know in the comments below. But I think that when people think of a luxury wristwatch, the watch that pops into their head is the Rolex Datejust, whether it be in steel or gold or two-tone. I think that the Datejust as a whole is what somebody kind of attributes to a luxury wristwatch. I think the watch that pops into their head is the Datejust. So ever since Rolex released the Datejust in 1945, it's kind of become this iconic classic wristwatch, as we were just discussing. The early Datejusts, especially like this 6104, are a little bit different than what I think most people think of when they think of vintage Datejusts or even Datejust in general. There's a couple of key features that I think make this watch in particular in the early Datejust really interesting, because we've had 1601s and 1600 series Datejusts on the channel before in steel, but I kind of wanted to hold out until we had something that was cool in the two-tone range to kind of talk about two-tone Datejust. I think two-tone watches in general are either kind of a love it or hate it kind of thing. As you probably know, Rolex is big on two-tone right now, especially rose gold in two-tone. That's kind of their thing. Matter of fact, we wrote a little article a few months back talking about kind of the resurgence of two-tone watches, and I don't mind a two-tone watch, but I find myself kind of gravitating towards specific two-tone watches versus just all two-tone watches, and it's, I think, kind of true for anything. But two-tone watches in general are just kind of striking, being that they've got yellow gold or rose gold or these kind of like bicolor metals that make up the composition of the piece in itself. So this 6104 and a lot of the earlier Datejusts have this nickname Ovettone. And Ovettone basically translates to big egg in Italian. So the nickname Ovettone comes from the fact that the watch in itself actually has kind of this like egg-like shape. We have kind of this partial bubble back to the case, which is kind of, again, part of like Rolex's design history and heritage. You can kind of see that here. The Rolex bubble back watches were the most common self-winding watches that Rolex produced in the late 1940s into, respectively the early 1950s. And with the introduction of like the 6104 and the earlier Datejusts, Rolex kind of carried that semi-bubble back technology over into these watches, which kind of denotes the nickname, the Ovettone. So Ovettone translates into big egg, and it kind of looks like an egg. I guess it's kind of eggy. There's kind of like that curvature to the case back as instead of like a 1601 or 1600 or whatever, the case back is kind of more flat and not, bubbly, if that makes sense. So interesting little fact, the Rolex Datejust models weren't actually signed with a model name until the 1950s, and early signed models were done so with kind of a red special text, which this specific 6104 has. So the cool thing about the red text is that it is synonymous with the introduction of model names. So for example, when the 1680 was first produced, the text was in red. Double red sea dweller, same thing. We're seeing that also in this model, being that it's an early Datejust and it's an early branded Datejust. As we were talking, Rolex really wasn't branding the Datejust until the 1950s. So this is a very early example of that. And we also do see that red text underneath Rolex and Oyster Perpetual, which is really cool. Another cool kind of thing to note as well is that Rolex is drawing attention to the key features of the watch, Datejust being in red, and then obviously, the key feature of the Datejust, which is the date in the watch, that's also in red. Interesting dial format too for the early Datejust. One, we don't have a cyclops over the date window, which I think is interesting. And then we also kind of have this hybrid dial where you have raised markers and the cornet is really elongated and also raised. Rolex's is also elongated and also big and bold, and then the text is actually printed on the dial. The dial is taken on kind of this tropical like patina. It's like really, really warm, and there's some like speckling throughout the dial. It's a really handsome watch, and the bezel is also interesting from the fact that it's an engine turned bezel. There's 2 markers at the 12 o'clock position, and then at every hour, there's this little block marker on the outside of the bezel. This specific watch is also cool for a couple of different reasons. It's early, it's from '54, but this specific watch retains like every piece of paper and booklet that you can pretty much kind of like hope for. It even has some early Rolex service documents. So one interesting thing is it came in this interesting Rolex book, and it's a really interesting, these guys are relentless today. I'm trying to record watch videos here.
Don't they know?
Don't they know what Cam is doing up here in this office? Perrier break. We've got like this sun, this partial clock. We've got the seals of Geneva. It's really interesting, the 2 coronets up here. And then it comes with all this amazing stuff that I'll kind of show you. The gentleman, whoever had this watch, who was the original owner, like saved everything. So a couple of cool little things here. First thing we have is this awesome chronometer certificate. So this was all handwritten. This is the movement number and the serial number of the watch on it, which is really, really awesome. It smells delicious. This is basically the COSC cert that was testing the accuracy of the movement. What's cool is we have like this little hand stamped cert that basically gives the date here. We have the serial and the reference number, the watch's timing in all the various positions. And then we also have this chronometer tag back here, which is really cool. I've seen these things in pieces. I've never seen a watch that is this complete with all of this stuff being not just original to the watch, but kind of all kept together, which is kind of cool. So that was from Geneva. And then we also have these little Rolex service documents. So the watch was serviced, let's see. It was serviced for $32 in 1958. Probably a lot of money back then, but definitely not so much today. We've got this original booklet here. And I think that this is actually, this is probably an early service booklet, but it's kind of cool. It's like facts you should know about your Rolex watch. I've never seen this booklet before in person, but it basically walks you through like the chronometer cert and kind of like what that means, which I think is pretty cool because people think, oh, Rolex luxury goods, blah, blah, blah. But this wasn't really talking about the luxury element of Rolex. It was talking about the technical side of it and the accuracy side of what it was that Rolex was doing. And then this is kind of cool. This is, again, it was serviced American Rolex Watch Corporation. These are just some more service documents. And then I believe this is, yep, this is another service document. So we had the watch serviced again. This time it went to Rolex New York a few years later. And basically it says new crystal, waterproofing case, and regulate. So in this case, I think he broke the crystal at some point, and it also says here, complete overhaul. Yeah, okay, so they replaced the crystal, they waterproofed it, or checked the waterproofing, and then it says repair rotor unit and clean the case. So they probably polished this at some point. I would say that the watch has definitely been polished, but not to the point of being kind of beat up. So in any case, kind of cool to have all of these documents with, you know, the watch. Often we're trying to figure out like the life that the watch led and who it was worn by and all that kind of stuff. And I think that that's kind of cool seeing all of this stuff together. So in any case, really excited to share this one with you guys as an early reference and an interesting one to talk about in the range of, you know, two-tone Rolex watches. So thank you guys, as always, for tuning in. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. If you've got watch questions, we are here and happy to help. Drop us a line at info@craftandtailored.com. If you're not doing so already, follow us on Instagram @craftandtailored, and I will see you in the next one. There's so much paperwork. Just drowning in paperwork over here, Pete.